Hey everybody, welcome to section 4, the final section in chapter 19, and in this one we're going to be talking about new ways of thinking that emerged during the Industrial Revolution. A recurring theme we've talked about in this chapter is how much industrialization changed things. It wasn't just about manufacturing products in factories. Populations were increasing. More people were living in cities. Family life was changing. And during this time, people, philosophers and economists and theorists, they tried to figure out why these changes were happening and how they could improve the lives of the working class. Let's start with an economic philosophy that I hope you've heard of before, that I hope you remember, called laissez-faire economics. Laissez-faire economics, this guy up here, Adam Smith, he didn't actually start it, but he was a big proponent for it in the 1600s. And it holds that governments should be hands-off. Right? An easy way that I like to remember it is that laissez up here kind of sounds like lazy. And when you're lazy, you don't get involved. So government does not get involved in the economy. They allow the market to determine it for itself. Another way of putting this, free market economy, right? You'll hear that term a lot today. These three characteristics right here are the big ones. Profit. That people do it to accumulate wealth. Minimal government intervention, right? That's laissez-faire. And then competition. Another word that you'll see for this is capitalism. Okay, competition, profit motive, those are central features of capitalism. And it was believed by economists that such a system could help all social classes. Let me erase the ink here so you can see this better. All right, so up at the top, this you'll hear this even today in politics about the trickle-down effect. The rich gain more wealth, right? These are your wealthy industrialists, the people that own the factories and are very, very successful. They then create more jobs by building more factories, and a higher spending increases demand because they're putting more products out there. And then low-skilled workers gain higher pay, there's more tax revenue, increased spending, and so forth. The idea here, to simplify, is that the rich would produce more at lower prices, and that would make the products more affordable. Then capitalists would invest in new businesses, creating new jobs. Governments played very little role in early industrialization. So supporters of laissez-faire economics use the growth of industry as an example of how it can work. And said, look at all this cool stuff we have, look at the increased wealth and so forth. But laissez-faire capitalism was not the only economic system that gained support. In fact, there were some that were dead set against it, that felt that it was an evil and that it was screwing over the working class. So you've also got some other newer economic philosophies, right? Laissez-faire capitalism had been around for a little while, but it was just becoming very popular during the Industrial Revolution. But some new ones that came about during this time. One was called utilitarianism. And this states that the goal of society should be the greatest happiness for the greatest number. All laws and actions should be based on utility, right? You see that in the first part of it. Utility is just another word for usefulness, all right? How useful is something? You look at John Stuart Mill, he was a big thinker in this, but in utilitarianism, you got to weigh it, okay? The many against the few, and you're never going to be able to make everybody happy, but you have to worry about making the greatest number happy. That's what every law and every government decision should be about. Now, back then, there were no laws that protected workers. Right? And utilitarian thinkers claim that government should protect the working class. And this makes sense when you think about the central philosophy of utilitarianism. The working class make up the majority of the population, so therefore laws should be designed to protect them. Now, another economic philosophy was socialism. Now, socialism, I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of, but I don't know. It's important that you understand really what it means. This states that people should own the means of production. All right. Means of production means that it is collectively owned, the factories, the wealth, and so forth. Socialists believe that capitalism leads to a huge gap between rich and poor. And the only way to fix that is to end the system of ownership that existed under capitalism. Now, you got to remember, under capitalism, a small amount of people own the majority of wealth. Socialism states that ownership of factories, farms, businesses, etc., all this stuff should be shared among the people, right? Let me just get this out of the way so you can fully see it. Share the wealth, all right? Some socialists tried to form communities based on these ideals called utopian communities. The word utopian means perfect. All right. They strove to create these perfect societies where everyone was equal and shared the wealth evenly. They never really took off. There were a couple that popped up here and there, even here in the United States. But socialists, they rather than really creating these utopian societies, they had a much larger impact on later laws that would go on to improve workers' rights. Now, socialism in the United States is often confused with the other major economic philosophy that emerged during this time, which is communism. And communism began from the writings of, one thing I forgot to go over here with this is just kind of explain a little bit better. All right, so with utopian societies, all right, so socialism, let's kind of contrast it here with this political cartoon. This over here is capitalism. And what do you see here is you see competition, right? You see fighting. Now, capitalists would argue that the best suited is able to get this flat screen TV, but then the one person that gets it has it, and then the other two are left with nothing. Socialism says, well, what about if we all work collectively, right? If we all use the TV and we all kind of shared in the enjoyment of it. Again, it's a very, very idealistic notion, not one that is always readily accepted, especially here in the United States. In the U.S., you've got competing views of it, and that's exemplified in this cartoon here. Capitalism described by capitalists. Where both sides, these would be the workers, these would be the business owners, are sharing in the wealth, right? They're both holding up money bags. Capitalism described by socialists are that the business owners are holding a gun to the workers and they're taking the money. Socialism described by socialists, the workers, everybody shares evenly. And then socialism described by capitalism is that they hold the money and that you have to take it from them basically at gunpoint. So obviously you've got competing views about it. Socialism is looked at, kind of shadily by a lot of people in the United States. And as I just mentioned, I got ahead of myself, but as I just mentioned, a big reason is because its association with communism. Now, to understand communism, we got to go where it started, and that was with this guy, Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a German philosopher. He is not Russian. Marxism is often very closely associated with Russia and the Soviet Union because of the communist state of the Soviet Union, but he himself was German. And he often collaborated with another German author, this guy Friedrich Engels, and together they wrote the Communist Manifesto. In this work, Marx said that all of human history boils down to class struggle. He says you go back to literally the beginning of time, and it's about class struggle. And it was the rich versus the proletariat. The proletariat, these guys here, these are the working class. And he phrased this as the haves versus the have-nots. He says that's all that history has been. The haves have always owned the means of production and wealth, even though they make up only a small part of the population. And Marx predicted that one day the proletariat would rise up against the rich and seize the means of production. And he believed that this would be in a violent worldwide struggle. And he used the Industrial Revolution as evidence of it. He says, look at what's happening in Great Britain, Germany, the United States. The poor are getting worse. This industrial working class is worse off even in the peasantry. And he said they're not going to stand for it for too long. And eventually this worldwide revolution would result in a new society called communism. Now, communism is a classless society. All right. No social classes in communism. There's no rich, there's no poor. And in true communism, wealth and power are equally shared. This ideal form of communism has never happened, though. What communism ends up being is it's a system which governments led by a small elite control all economic and political life. We'll talk more about that when we get into communist governments like the Soviet Union in a couple of months. It's almost always ruled by dictators as well. Now, Marx made some pretty bold predictions about the future, which did not come true. There was never a worker revolution in industrialized nations like Great Britain and the U.S. like he predicted. Instead, Marxism inspired revolutions in developing nations like Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Eventually, Marxism was shown to be very flawed and has been rejected in most nations throughout the world. All right, so that wraps things up on Section 4 as well as Chapter 19, and we're going to continue talking about the Industrial Revolution in Chapter 21.